Spent 22 years building houses for other people. Never once thought about what it meant that I couldn't hold my own together. My name is Robert Hale. I'm 47 years old, and I run a residential construction company out of Nashville, Tennessee. We do custom builds mostly, the kind of houses where families plan to grow old. 3 bedrooms become 4, back porches become sunrooms, driveways get widened when the kids start driving. I've built close to 200 of them over the years. I know what a house looks like when it's solid, and I know what it looks like when the foundation's been compromised. Took me too long to see that same thing happening to my own life. My wife's name was Cecile. We met when I was 26, and she was 24, at a fundraiser for a children's hospital where she was volunteering as an event coordinator. She wore a green dress and laughed too loud at someone's joke, and I thought, that's the one. 2 years later, we were married. 4 years after that, our son was born. 2 years later, we were married. 4 years after that, our son was born. We named him Cooper. He came into the world with his fists clenched and eyes wide open, like he was already ready to argue about something. He's mine to the bone, that kid. For the first 12 years, we had the kind of marriage I thought was normal for people who worked hard and loved each other and didn't have time to overthink things. We weren't romantic in the movies sense. We didn't take a lot of vacations. But we showed up for each other. I built the deck she wanted. She kept the books for the company when we couldn't afford an accountant. Cooper went to good schools, played baseball, made friends. We had a life. Then Cecile got promoted to regional director for a hotel chain. The same year Cooper started middle school. I was proud of her. Genuinely. She'd worked for that title for years, and she deserved it. I told her so. I told her often. What I didn't see coming was what the title brought with it. The travel started slowly. A conference in Atlanta here, a property review in Dallas there, once a month, then twice. She'd pack her rolling carry-on on Sunday evenings, and I'd make dinner, and we'd watch something on TV before she left early Monday morning. Cooper and I had our Tuesday taco nights, our Friday drives to the batting cages. We built our own rhythm around her absence, and I told myself that was just what modern marriages looked like. The first thing that snagged my brain was the perfume. Cecile had worn the same fragrance since we were dating. A warm, soft scent, something with sandalwood in it. She bought it twice a year from the same department store. Then one evening in February, she came home from a 4-day trip to Memphis, and she smelled different. Sharper. More expensive. I asked about it, and she said the hotel had put travel bottles in the executive suite, and she'd used them. Made perfect sense. I let it go. But I started paying attention in a way I hadn't before. She started closing the bathroom door when she showered, which she'd never done. She upgraded her phone and set up a new passcode without mentioning it, which I only noticed because the old one had been Cooper's birthday and I'd used it to call her once when my phone died. She laughed differently on calls in the other room. Lighter, like she was performing ease rather than feeling it. I am not a suspicious man by nature. I spend my days managing crews and reading blueprints, and I deal in what is measurable. So I measured. I started paying attention to dates, times, small inconsistencies. When she said she had a late dinner with a regional VP in Charlotte, and I looked up the restaurant and it didn't exist. When she called at 9 p.m. from what she said was her hotel room, but the background had the sound of a bar. When she told me she'd taken a cab from the airport and I saw a charge on her joint card for a ride from a private driver I didn't recognize. By April, I was fairly certain. By May, I was sure. The man's name was Garrison Ford. I found that out through a combination of her email. She'd left herself logged in on our shared laptop once and hadn't realized. And one very careful Google search. He was 44, divorced, and worked in commercial real estate. His LinkedIn photo showed a man who looked like he'd spent more time at the gym than I had in the last decade. He was handsome in the way that felt deliberate. Curated. The kind of handsome that requires maintenance. He traveled for work. Of course he did. I didn't explode for work. Of course he did. I didn't explode. I didn't call her and scream. I sat at my kitchen table for about an hour after Cooper went to bed, and I thought about what I was looking at and what I needed to do about it. I'm a builder. I don't tear things down until I know what I'm replacing them with. I called my attorney the next morning. Her name is Beverly Marsh, sharp as a filed edge, and she's handled 3 of my contractor disputes without losing once. She listened to everything I told her, and then she said, quietly, "Before we do anything, we document." I said I understood. She recommended a private investigator named Dale Hutchins, who worked mostly domestic cases and had a background in insurance fraud. which meant he knew how to trace financial patterns as well as physical ones. Dale drove a forgettable gray sedan and had a handshake like a closing door. I liked him immediately. He found what he found in 10 days. Garrison Ford and Cecile had been meeting for at least 8 months, possibly longer. 3 hotels, 2 cities, shared dinners that were charged to a card she'd opened without telling me, a credit card in her name only that I had no knowledge of. He'd been in Nashville twice, both times on dates when she told me she was hosting back-to-back client calls from home, and I needed to keep Cooper out of her hair. I thought about the Saturday in October when she'd asked me to take Cooper to his friend's birthday party and then to a movie after. We'd been gone almost 6 hours. I'd thought she was grateful for the quiet. Now I understood what she'd needed the quiet for. The financial piece was more damaging than I expected. Dale pulled records on our joint accounts going back 14 months, and what emerged was a slow, patient rerouting of money. Small amounts at first. 100 here, 200 there. Moving into an account I'd never seen. Over 14 months, it added up to just under $19,000. That was an impulse. That was planning. I didn't sleep much the week after I got Dale's report. I'd lie in bed next to Cecile and listen to her breathe and try to understand how the same person who'd held Cooper through his ear infections and argued with the school board about the reading curriculum and called my mother every week could also be doing this. People are capable of more compartmentalization than I'd credited. One Thursday evening, Cooper and I were in the backyard after dinner. He was throwing a baseball against the pitchback net while I sat on the steps with a beer. He was 12 then, tall for his age, focused, with his mother's eyes and my hands wide across the palm. He stopped throwing and turned around and asked me, without any preamble the way kids do, "Is Mom okay? She seems different." I looked at my son and felt the question land in the center of my chest. "What do you mean different?" He shrugged. "Like she's somewhere else even when she's here. Like she's waiting for something. 12 years old. I said I thought she was just tired from work. He nodded like he almost believed me and went back to throwing. But I sat there for a long time after. I made the decision the following week. Not out of rage. Out of clarity. I started by talking to an accountant separately from our shared one. A man named Teddy Barron who handled financials for one of my subcontractors. I walked him through everything and he helped me understand what protecting myself looked like from a business standpoint. The construction company was in my name and always had been. But Cecile had been added as a secondary on 2 of the business accounts. That changed. Everything that could be cleanly moved to a business-only structure was moved. Then I called Beverly Marsh again, this time to file. The papers were ready by a Wednesday. I had Dale put them in her hands at her office the following Monday, which was a day she told me she had a property review in Knoxville. She didn't. She was in Nashville all day. I know because my GPS tracker on her car, the one I'd installed 4 months earlier, showed her car parked at the downtown office from 9 to 5. She lied about Knoxville the same way she'd been lying about everything else. Just automatic, like breathing. That same Monday, I picked up Cooper from school. I told his teacher we had a family appointment. We drove to my brother's house in Clarksville, about an hour north. My brother Ray, no, let me not use that name. My brother's name, I'll keep private. What matters is that he knew the situation, had known for 2 weeks, and had a room ready for Cooper and a spare bedroom for me. I left a letter on the kitchen counter. I'm not going to reproduce the whole thing here because some of what I wrote is too private for me to repeat, but the essential of it was this. I know. I have known for months. I have documentation of everything, including the account you opened without telling me and the money you moved. I'm not interested in your explanation, and I'm not going to fight you in front of our son. Cooper is with me. He is safe. He will stay with me. If you want to see him, go through Beverly Marsh. Do not call my phone. Cecile called my phone 11 times before 8 p.m. that night. I sent each one to voicemail. She texted 40-something messages, starting with confusion, moving to anger, moving to something that read like grief, though I wasn't sure by then if I could trust my reading of her emotional states. She called my brother's number. He didn't answer. She called my mother, who knew, and who told her only that Cooper was safe, and that was all she was going to say. She didn't call the police. I think her attorney told her not to. Cooper was confused that first night, and I sat with him on the pull-out couch in my brother's spare room, and I told him the truth in a way I can manage. I told him that his mom and I were going to live separately for a while, that nothing that was happening was his fault, that I was going to be with him every single day and that would not change. He was 12, and he processed things quietly, which worried me more than if he'd cried. He asked, "Did Mom do something wrong?" I told him that adults sometimes made choices that hurt people they loved, and that whatever his mom had done, She still loved him. He nodded. Didn't say anything else that night. In the morning, he ate breakfast and asked if he could bring his baseball gear. We settled into my brother's house for 6 weeks while Beverly worked. The custody arrangement took longer than the asset division because Cecile contested it, and for a few weeks her attorney was trying to argue that removing Cooper from the family home constituted some kind of instability on my part. Beverly took that apart methodically. She had Dale's documentation. She had the financial records. She had screenshots of text messages between Cecile and Garrison Ford that were retrieved properly and legally. She had a pattern. Cecile got alternating weekends and Wednesday evenings. She pushed for more and didn't get it. Her attorney was good, but Beverly was better, and the evidence didn't favor Cecile's position. Through all of that, I said nothing to Cooper about Garrison Ford. He was 12. That wasn't information he needed. I just kept showing up. School pickups, practices, dinners, homework. I rented the house in the same school district, so his life changed as little as possible. 3 bedrooms, a yard, a basketball hoop I put up the first weekend because he'd wanted one for 2 years, and I'd never gotten around to it. That first summer, the 2 of us figured out how to cook 3 meals we liked and rotated them. Pasta, grilled chicken, breakfast for dinner. Cooper started a journal because his school counselor suggested it, and he'd write in it at the kitchen table while I did paperwork, and we'd just exist in the same room not talking, which was its own kind of comfort. Cecile went to see him on her first designated weekend. She took him to a movie and to dinner at his favorite restaurant. He came home quiet. I didn't ask questions. He went to his room and did homework and later said the pasta sounded good for dinner. I made the pasta. I want to be honest about something. The first 6 months were harder than I expected, and I was not always the steady, composed person I'm describing. There were nights I sat in the dark in the kitchen and felt the full weight of 17 years of belief being proven wrong, and I was not okay. I called my brother too late at night more than once. I went to a therapist named Hale who had an office near my job site and who said very little but listened without judgment, and that helped more than I anticipated. Garrison Ford, as it turned out, didn't last. Dale had told me that men like that rarely did. Men who pursued married women with that specific kind of focused attention. There was always a point at which the complication outweighed the thrill. I found out through mutual acquaintances about 8 months after the divorce was filed that he'd stopped returning Cecile's calls, that she'd moved to a smaller apartment across town, that she'd had a quiet, difficult winter. I didn't feel triumphant about that. I want to be clear, I felt tired mostly, and something quieter that took me a while to name, which was relief that the story was at least coherent, that what happened had a shape I could understand. Cooper was 13 when the divorce was finalized. He handled a paperwork date without ceremony, just asked to dinner that night if we could get ice cream, and we did. He got the big scoop. He'd earned it. The following spring, I was overseeing the framing on a new build in a neighborhood I'd been working in for years. A quiet pocket of East Nashville with wide lots and old trees. The house was a custom order, a family from out of state who'd wanted something specific and sent me a 30-page brief to prove it. My site supervisor, a man I'd worked with for 9 years, had taken a week off, so I was doing more of the on-ground work myself than usual. The landscape designer came out to do a site evaluation. Her name was Aubrey. She worked for herself, had been in Nashville about 4 years, designed the kind of outdoor spaces that made the inside of a house feel irrelevant. She had paint-stained boots and a clipboard covered in hand-drawn sketches, and she walked around the perimeter of the lot with the focused attention of someone who genuinely cared what happened to it. We talked for about 20 minutes about drainage and the placement of a large oak they wanted to preserve. She asked the right questions. She knew what she was doing. That was it. For a long time. We worked on 2 more projects together over the next year. Professional. Courteous. I was not looking for anything, and I want to be honest about that because I think it matters that it happened without me steering it. I was just trying to build things and raise my kid and stop being so tired all the time. Cooper liked her from the moment they met, which happened by accident when he stopped by a job site with my lunch I'd forgotten. He was 14 by then and had his mother's social ease, the ability to talk to adults without visibly calculating how to do it. He said afterward, unprompted, "She's cool." She actually asked about my curveball. Aubrey was 38. She'd been married once, briefly, before she moved to Nashville. No children, though she spoke about her nieces and nephews in Iowa with the kind of warmth that said she understood what it meant to love someone small and loud and completely dependent on you for everything. She didn't ask about my divorce until we'd known each other for almost 8 months, and then only because I mentioned Cecile in a context that made it necessary to explain, and she just nodded and said she was sorry it had been that hard. and then asked a question about the projects we were working on. I thought, there it is. A person who doesn't need your wound in order to connect with you. We had dinner for the first time in September of that year. Cooper was at Cecile's for the weekend. Aubrey suggested a Thai place I hadn't been to, and we sat for 3 hours and talked about everything except the things that usually come up on first dinners. The resume-style accounting of who you've been and what you've been through. We talked about her grandmother's garden in Iowa, the worst build I'd ever overseen, a book we'd both read, the specific way Nashville had changed in the 10 years since I moved there, and the 10 years since she had. By the time I dropped her at her car, I'd forgotten what it felt like to want a second evening with someone. I didn't rush anything. I want to say that clearly, not because I need credit for it, but because it was a deliberate choice. Cooper had been through enough transitions. I was not going to introduce instability into his life because I was lonely. We dated quietly for almost a year before I told him anything definitive, and by then, he'd already figured most of it out, because he's sharp and I hadn't hidden it particularly well. He said, "I know. It's fine, Dad. She's good." 13 words. That was his permission, which I hadn't asked for but which I was grateful for all the same. The first time Cecile reached out to me directly outside of attorney communication was about 14 months after the divorce finalized. She called on a Sunday afternoon. Cooper was in the yard with a kid from next door. I almost let it go to voicemail, and then I answered because I was curious, and because I'd reached the point where I wasn't afraid of the conversation anymore. She sounded different, quieter, less like the version of herself she'd been performing in the last years of our marriage. She said she wanted to talk about Cooper. His school counselor had flagged some things, and she wanted to make sure she and I were coordinated. That was legitimate, so we talked about it for 20 minutes and kept it practical and professional, which was the only register that worked for us anymore. At the end, she said, "You seem okay." "I am," I told her. A pause. "I'm glad." I didn't say anything back to that. Some things don't require a response. The next time I saw her in person was at Cooper's first high school baseball game. She sat on one side of the bleachers, and I sat on the other, and at one point Cooper hit a line drive into the gap, and we both stood up at the same moment and yelled, and in the half second before I caught myself, I heard her voice as if no time had passed at all. Specific and familiar, like an old song you didn't realize you still knew the words to. But then Cooper rounded second, and I sat back down, and Aubrey was next to me, and the game went on. Cecile's face did something complicated when she saw Aubrey. I watched it happen from across the bleachers, and I didn't take any satisfaction in it. It was just information. She understood what she was looking at, and she understood what she'd walked away from, and that was her accounting to make, not mine. Cooper pitched the last 2 innings. He struck out 4 batters. After the game, he jogged over to us first, then crossed the field to where his mother was standing. I watched him hug her, brief and careful in the way teenagers hug when they're managing what they feel. And I thought, he's going to be okay. He already is. That was 3 years ago now. Cooper's a junior. He's got 2 colleges looking at him for baseball. His curveball is exactly as good as he believes it is, possibly better. He sees his mother twice a month on average, sometimes more when she makes the effort, and their relationship is their own thing now, something he manages on his own terms, which is probably how it should go. Aubrey and I got married last October. Small ceremony, backyard of the house I built from the framing up, which I thought was appropriate. Cooper stood up with me, one of Aubrey's nieces, flew in from Iowa and immediately adopted Cooper as her honorary big brother, which he has handled with exactly the mix of embarrassment and pleasure that a 17-year-old should. Somebody asked me not long ago what I'd learned from all of it. They wanted something concise and quotable, I think. Something that could fit on a card. I said I didn't have that. I just had what I knew from 20-some years of building things. That a house is only as good as what you can't see. The foundation, the framing, the work done before anyone comes to see the finished product. You can make the outside look like anything, but the inside will tell you the truth eventually. It always does. I trusted a person who'd stopped being trustworthy, and I didn't know it for a long time. That's a hard thing to reckon with. But I also know that the years since have been built differently, more carefully, with materials that have actually been tested. I'm not saying I'm grateful it happened. I'm saying I know who I am on the other side of it, and that man is better than the one who didn't know to look twice at his own foundation. Some things you only learn the hard way, and the only real waste would be learning nothing at all. Cooper leaves for college in about 14 months. I've already been thinking about what that first Monday will feel like. The house quiet and his room empty. I've had years of practice being afraid of a particular future and arriving at it and finding it survivable. I think I'll be all right. I know what it is to build something real. I've been doing it my whole life. I just finally got the right house. I didn't plan to tell this story for a long time. It felt too close, and then it felt too settled. And then one day I realized those were two different reasons for the same hesitation. I wasn't sure I'd learned enough from it to say anything worth hearing. What I know now, having had a few years to sit with all of it, is that what happened between Cecile and me wasn't some sudden collapse. It was a slow erosion, the kind that starts at the edges and works inward while you're busy looking at something else. I was building houses. She was building a different life. Neither of us said anything about what was actually happening until the whole structure was already compromised. I think about Cecile sometimes not with bitterness, but as a kind of case study in what happens when a person confuses wanting more with deserving more. She had a real life, a son who adored her, a man who was faithful, a career she'd earned. None of that felt like enough, so she looked elsewhere. And I understand the human impulse in that. I do. I felt it myself in smaller ways. The desire for something newer, something that makes you feel less ordinary. What I've come to believe is that acting on it without honesty, without the willingness to say this isn't working, and then do something about it together, is where the moral failure actually lives. Not in wanting, in the lying required to have what you want while keeping what you have. Garrison Ford was never going to be what Cecile thought he was. A man who pursues married women with that kind of patience is not a man in search of love. He's in search of a particular feeling, and a feeling doesn't last. And then he moves on. Cecile learned that. I don't take any satisfaction in it, but I'd be lying if I said it didn't confirm something I'd already suspected. That the choices she made had a logic to them, and that logic had a natural endpoint, and the endpoint arrived on schedule. Cooper is the part I'm most proud of navigating. Not because I did it gracefully. I didn't, always. But because I decided early that his stability was the one thing I would not compromise. Every decision I made in those first 2 years, every morning I got up and made breakfast and drove him to practice, was a choice to be present when it would have been easier to disappear into my own grief. I think that's what he'll carry with him, not the fact of the divorce, but the fact that I stayed, that I showed up, that I let him see a man work through something painful without becoming someone unrecognizable on the other side of it. There's something I've come to believe about the way consequences actually work, and it has nothing to do with fate or punishment or anything handed down from somewhere above. It's simpler and harder than that. The choices a person makes determine the structure of their life, quietly, over time, the same way soil conditions determine what a foundation can hold. Cecile's choices built a structure that couldn't support what she thought she was building toward. Mine, in the years after, built something that could. Aubrey didn't rescue me from anything. I want to be clear about that. She came into a life that I had already rebuilt on my own, and she added to it. That distinction matters. I wasn't looking to be saved. I was just living carefully and working hard and trying to deserve the trust Cooper placed in me every single day. The rest followed from that. What I'd say to anyone in the middle of what I was in, the clarity comes. Not all at once, not on your schedule, but it comes. And the person you become while you're waiting for it. That's the part that's actually in your hands. I chose to build something real. I always have. I just finally understood what that required.